and welcome to our first, proper lesson in Advanced Higher History. As we go through the course, we do lessons very much in this format. Now, as I said in our introduction to the course, the lessons in Advanced Higher History are not like anything you've come across in Higher History before. The way that we're going to do it here is in class. Normally you would have the PowerPoint handout of this, and basically as I kind of go through, I tend not to write too much on the PowerPoint slides, but I've got a lot of information still to share with you. What I get you to do is kind of annotate a lot of what we discuss in class onto your handout and basically take notes around the key information that's already on that slide. But without further ado, this is the first lesson then in our Iron Age section. Now, one of the most standout survivals from the Iron Age in northern Britain's landscape is the Hillfort. Iron Age people tended not to have towns and cities. They lived in kind of spread out, disparate villages or settlements with a few huts at a time. They tend not to survive because most of their structures are made out of wood, so archaeologists find post holes or bits of the ground that have different coloured soil on them to say there used to be a log in there that held up a roof, and it's not very impressive. This stuff is. Now you can see on the slide that we start off here with today, this is two of the hills from Eildon Hill. Now it's a three-peaked chain of hills in the landscape of the Scottish borders. Because it had three hilltops, the Romans used to call it Trimontium, or three hills. Well, the Hillfort itself is based around one of those hilltops, the northern one, so it's called Eildon Hill North. You can see it in the centre of the slide here, and you can see those concentric rings that work their way around the shoulders of a hill. Those are the outer ramparts from this Hillfort, so those are the massive monumental scale walls that would have been there 2,000 years ago. Now, there are literally hundreds of these across the northern British landscape. They are all over the place. You just need to know where to look. So because they're the most common survival of the Iron Age, this is where we're going to start. We're going to look at what Hillforts were, what their purpose was, and what survives of them, and what we can use from that to learn about the Iron Age in northern Britain. So, these pictures are taken from when I went to go and visit Eildon Hill a couple of years ago now. It was a nice sunny day, but as it was actually a really good experience. And part of the Advanced Higher History course is it's going to hopefully open your eyes up to the importance of something called experimental archaeology. When you get to university, and if you want to carry on your studies with history, and if you go into archaeology itself as well, this is becoming an increasingly important field in modern archaeology. This is where the archaeologists literally go and try out and try to do things as they would have been done in ancient times. In the likes of northern Britain here, the Hillforts, we got archaeologists tramping up the side of a hill wearing full kit to see what type of physical condition they'd be in by the time they got to the top. Would they be too knackered to fight? Would they be at a disadvantage? Where might they have built a fort on the way up or some kind of defensive screen? Would they have been under attack from spears and arrows? You don't really know this by just looking at a textbook or looking at a kind of photograph taken by a plane looking down on the site. The best way to do it is go and visit it yourself. So this is what I did. So with another history teacher, I went to Eildon Hill Fort in the Scottish border. So this is the path leaving the roadside, kind of going up towards the mound that has a hill fort on it. So if you are a historian coming and visiting this site, you can ask yourself, what are the benefits of this site? So the benefits of this site are, I was knackered by the time I got to the top of this hill. It was a hot, sunny day. I wouldn't say I'm particularly unfit, but I was pretty good by the time I got to the top. If I was in danger of my life and there were people at the top of that hill trying to kill me or rain things down on me, I'd have been pretty wary, been pretty on edge by the time I got to the top, and I'd be pretty tired if it came to having a full-blown fight by the time I got up there. So that's one thing to bear in mind, is that as a defensive site, it's good. However, the flip side of that is, and hopefully you're starting to think now, a hill fort is supposed to defend a whole tribe and their people. So if they're all on the top of that hill and there's no source of water or food on that hill, what are they doing for supplies? And then how hard was it for them to get those supplies up there in the first place? How knackered are people by the time they get to the top of that hill? Is it going to be relatively inaccessible to the elderly or to the very young? Are they getting their livestock up there too? The fact that it is so steep and so difficult to get to creates issues, as well as playing into their hands and making it a good point to defend. So when you get to the top of it, This is me looking north towards Edinburgh, which would have been in the far, far distance. You can see the valley round about this hill marks out as a superb site. The late Iron Age, the landscape would have been deforested largely by Iron Age farmers who'd have cleared the land of forest to plant their crops. So what you see in front of you probably isn't tremendously different from what was here in the Iron Age, maybe a little bit less regular obviously, and no railway bridge off to the left. But you see the land, it's clearly really good for farming. So this is the defensive site, which gives you views over miles around in every single direction. So I'm probably going to ask you the question again in the slide, what is good about this? The good things about this site are you can see your enemy coming from a very long way away, which is a good point of many hill forts. It gives advance warning to the community. It also commands really good farmland all around it, so it gives you kind of strategic control of the landscape, so it allows you to protect your farmers that are nearby the hill fort itself. They can run into the hill fort, I guess, if any attackers come. And if you have any kind of like signal fires or anything on top of the hill, you can easily signal the people around about to get up to the fort before enemies can make it, as long as you have lookouts constantly keeping a vigil. So in this case, it's control of the landscape, it is a view of enemies approaching, and also if you think about it, if you are the people in the tribe that permanently live on top of that hill, you've got the physical advantage of being higher up in the landscape than them. It means the ordinary people down in the valley below you always have to look up to you, which is hierarchy. It means that someone is going to be more important than someone else. Now this is a word we're going to come across an awful lot in the course, and that word is prestige. That's about showing off and being more important than someone else. So the person who lives in this site, the person who occupies it, the person who's in control of it, has prestige, they have importance because they are in charge of the landscape they're about. Everyone has to look up to them literally, and they probably have a say over the life and death of the people surrounding that hill fort. If they like the people around about them, they can get in, yes, when threats come. If they don't, the gates could be barred and they're left to the mercies of whatever invaders are coming. So power and importance come with this site for the people that control it. This is my history teacher pal I went up with. This is us on top of the actual hill fort itself, Eildon Hill North. Now you can see just where he's standing, there's almost a kind of like rampart-esque rim around the top of this hill. Now the top of it's been flattened off largely into a kind of plateau. That pile of rocks in the distance is the remains of a Roman watchtower that was built here after the Romans came through and conquered it. This site that he's standing on is where all the huts for the tribe and the people who semi-permanently lived on top of this would have been built, and you can see the kind of still the commanding view they have looking out south this time down towards the modern day border of England, and it's a large space as well. They'd fit an awful lot of people up here. There you go, benefits of site size. So where he was standing looking over the lip of that hill down towards the shoulder of it, you can see this rampart snaking its way across the second plateau a bit further down. We think that was an enclosure, or kind of basically a big walled field that they would have kept their livestock in. So when people are fleeing from attackers that are coming in, they're not going to leave the most valuable thing down in the valley below them for the invaders to go and carry off, which is going to be their livestock, their cattle, their animals, their sheep, their goats. They're going to drive them up the hill with them, and they're not all going to fit on the top of the people, so they'd be kept down here in basically the kind of paddock field for the occupants of the hill fort. Now, I think we're going to see this a bit later on as well, but this area of the hill fort, if you go down into that rampart, you can still see the layers of the stonework, which is incredible. That stuff was put there, piled up there before the Old Testament events, or some of them happened, and certainly before the New Testament events happened. This is 2,000 year old. This scree, or this kind of like loose rock that's in the middle of the photograph there, that is the remains of the uppermost wall where my friend was standing in the previous slide. There used to be a big tall, basically castle wall almost around there. Over the years it has crumbled, fallen, been broken down, and it's tumbled down the hillside. Now there's no naturally occurring exposed rock on these hilltops, so all this scree stuff is boulders, fieldstones and rocks that were carried up there by people to build those walls, and the amount of it when you get close to it is stupendous. It's certainly a massive labour intensive effort to make that. There you go. So benefits the site, it allows a space for livestock to be protected as well as people. So moving a bit further down the hillside, you can go down and see that rampart encircled the livestock enclosure there. This is pre-Roman man-made construction. So the Romans came to this area of Britain in 78 AD, and that wall was old by the time they came. So it gives you an idea of just how long this occupation has lasted in this area. On the left-hand side of that photograph, you can see the scree I was talking about down the hillside. All of this is the rubble left over from the walls that have tumbled from the top of the hill up above. None of that's naturally occurring on the hillside. All of that was brought there by people. So that's a tremendous amount of masonry. And the wall must have been enormous. There you go, from a different angle looking into the inside of the livestock enclosure rampart, you can clearly see the courses of stonework that would have made up that wall. It's not mortared together, it's just rock piled on top of rock, but 2,000 years later it is still there. So, looking at wider hill forts across Iron Age northern Britain. The thing about hill forts is, and most of your questions are going to basically be chasing after this, is what are hill forts for? Now it might, from the name, seem a little bit obvious, they're for protection, it's a fort. But that's not necessarily the case. Now, the old-fashioned Victorian view was that hill forts were for defence. This is where the locals went to go and hide from the Romans when they came through to invade. The more modern interpretation is certainly the one that's been snowballing, I guess, in the last kind of 10 to 15 years, is that hill forts aren't necessarily just defensive sites. There's something else going on there. In fact, they might not be defensive. So let's see what evidence there is for the various different functions that are behind these things. So starting off, we think that hill forts conveyed a variety of ideological statements. So that means basically, yes, it could be about defence. It could be about showing off that your tribe are really strong. Militarily, if you walk up the valley and you see a gigantic big rampart on top of the nearest hill and there's loads of soldiers on top of it with spears, they look militarily very strong and you don't want to mess. However, it could be something else. What happens if those giant walls you see on top of the hill had symbols of the local cult or god or religion posted above them, or skulls of their enemies, that kind of thing, or any kind of religious symbols painted on the side? Then it becomes a religious site and it becomes a sacred enclosure at the top of a hill that they've walled off, possibly because they want to separate the sacred from the everyday. Alternatively, it could be that the hill fort functions like a kind of palace or a kind of chieftain's hall, so it's like a prestige statement because that's where the rich people live, that's where the people that got power are, because they're physically above the rest of the community and people have to look up to them. It also might be that it is about the tribe or the wider community. Maybe this is a place where everyone comes together, so it's like an Iron Age version of the Cowell Games. Everyone comes to the hill fort and they have a party for 3 days in the summer when a festival happens, and the wall basically delineates the space where this happens. It's like kind of sacred space where the people come together and reaffirm what it is to be part of their tribe. So there's various different interpretations of what these hill forts could be about. There are similarities from hill fort to hill fort. As I said, there are hundreds of them across northern Britain, and they are all across the UK, but for some reason they seem to cluster in the Scottish borders and in north of England. There's similarities in their structure, but often it's kind of governed by the shape of the hilltop they put the thing on. But in a lot of cases, there are unique things happening from hillside to hillside. So we're going to have a look at some different versions as we go through this. Now, at the hill forts that are clustered in south-eastern Scotland and the Scottish borders, evidence of warfare and violence is not prevalent, it's not convincing. So this is what's led archaeologists to think, hang on, these might not be about warfare. Now, the famous one that got everyone thinking it was about warfare is, and it's not really relevant to our course, so I'm not going to kind of focus on it too much, is the biggest hill fort in the whole of the British Isles is down in the south of England, quite near the southern coast. It's called Maiden Castle down in Dorset. It is enormous. I cannot state just how big that site is. You could fit many, many football pitches within just the upper enclosure of that hill fort. It's enormous. And we have written evidence to say that the Roman legions, when they invaded Britain, besieged that hill fort. There was an entire tribe inside it, and there was quite a nasty battle between the Romans and the tribal occupants. And when archaeologists went in, they found a lot of evidence of warfare, dead bodies with horrible wounds on them, catapult bolts and stones fired by slingers in the ground around the fort. And that was found quite early on in the process of archaeology becoming a science. So from that, archaeologists said, well, these Hillforts are all about fighting, it's all about war. And that became a label they stuck on Hillforts all across the country. However, as archaeologists are exploring and digging into more of these sites, it seems that Maiden Castle is not representative of what's going on in all of them. It seems to be that this lack of evidence of warfare may point to something else happening in these sites. Let's look at the different roles of the different Hillforts. Now we're going to break this down into kind of get factors, I guess, of what they were for. Now, as we kind of go through PowerPoints like this in Advanced High History, you're going to find out that each one of the different factors that contribute to an issue, we're going to look at information that backs that factor up, and there's going to always be information that kind of undercuts its importance and kind of lets us question if that's what really was going on. So I guess if you're coming at this from a higher history approach, that would be your analysis versus your analysis plus. So the first factor behind what Hillforts are for is arguing that it was about defence. Now, the first paragraph there, invasionist theory maintains that Hillforts were the result of force and population movement, and defences grew as waves of invaders swept across the country. Now, that stems from the Celtic invasion theory. Now, the Celts weren't the indigenous people that were originally in Britain. The Celts came from Switzerland and from kind of Central Europe. They spread out across Gaul, or what we know as France nowadays, and then they came across the Channel around about 1000 BC into the British Isles. Now, the people who were there originally obviously would not have enjoyed these new people coming and pinching all their stuff and stealing their land. So historians argue under the invasionist theory that they built the Hillforts to defend their lands against the Celtic invaders. Now, we see from the archaeological record that Hillforts are occupied and then they're left abandoned for centuries and then they are reoccupied again. This ties in with the Roman invasions that came along later. Julius Caesar arrived on the shores of Britain in 55 BC, kind of noodled around for a couple of years and went away and got himself stabbed in Rome. But then the Romans came back proper in 43 AD with the invasions of Emperor Claudius and then kind of worked their way across the British Isles. When the Romans crept across the landscape of Britain, these Hillforts were rebuilt and regarrisoned, and it very much looks like, yes, they were used as defensive emplacements to try and protect the native people against a scary invader. However, modern theory maybe doesn't support this. Excavation and dating advances now suggest that some Hillforts predate the invaders and then therefore they defy this invasionist model. In other words, they're building Hillforts before invasions happen, so what's going on there? Why do you need a big fortified hilltop if you're not being invaded? So Eildon Hill, coming back to this as we kind of looked at it earlier on, is one of the most important, one of the largest Hillfort sites in South East Scotland. In terms of the focus of our course in Northern Britain, it is a really big deal. We're going to learn about the names of some of the tribes in Northern Britain as we go through too. And if you've got your kind of like notes ready to go on this one, this is slide 9, so I'm going to get you guys to take down a note of the tribal name for this area. The tribe that held Lothian and the borders of Scotland was called the Votadini. So that's the Votadini. Now, do not worry about these really strange names. You're going to come across them again and again and again. You're going to start to recognise them. But the Votadini tribe had two centres. One was at Traprain Law, which is just southeast of modern-day Edinburgh, and the other one is this at Eildon Hill, which is next to modern-day Melrose and Selkirk down on the borders. This was a big deal for them. Now, it's not a capital city by any means. There's not a city here. There's enough hut circles on it to suggest there's something approaching an Iron Age town on it, but we don't know if it was permanently occupied. It could have been seasonal, like they stayed there for a few weeks in the summer and then they all went away again, or maybe there were people that stayed there all year round. We're just not quite sure. What it was, though, was right on the border with the Votadini territory with their warlike neighbours to the west. The tribe to the west of them were called the Selgovae, that means the forest people. They're spelled Selgovae. The Selgovae were a very warlike bunch, and in amongst all of this, the Romans arrive and then they attack the site as well. So it seems that Eildon Hill probably was fortified to defend the Votadini against the nasty neighbours they had, the Selgovae, and it seems to have been a place that defended against the Roman advances when the Romans arrived in 78 AD as well. So that's one potential use of Hillforts, defending against Rome. So as I've spoken about before, Hillforts cluster in the south of Scotland. These people seem to be exposed to greater external threat than their contemporaries in northern Scotland. Now this, as I say before I move on to this section, that is supported by the fact that Roman invasions of Britain intended to take the whole of the British Isles, yes, but they never made it all the way and made it stick. The Roman invasions did conquer the whole of what we know of as Scotland at one point, but they didn't hold on to it. And their invasions into the far north, and by that I'm talking about going north of the River Clyde or north of the Forth, so that kind of like central belt of Scotland, they only launched really 3 significant invasions that maybe looked at going above or north of that point. So the north of Scotland didn't really need, it seems, if you're looking at Romans as a threat anyway, all these hillforts and defences, because the threat wasn't there. South of Scotland, however, faced a lot of strife and turmoil from the Romans and from a powerful tribe in kind of northern England called the Brigantes. So it makes sense that the people around there felt they had to defend themselves and therefore built hillforts. So that ties in with the idea that hillforts are important defensive sites. Another factor for the use of hillforts is administrative centres. So this is Maiden Castle, the giant one I was talking about down the south coast of England. Now we don't tend to talk about this too much because it's not relevant to our topic. Our topic is Northern Britain, so we're kind of looking from about, I guess, Hadrian's Wall and up, or northwards of that for our unit. And Dorset down the south coast of England is not in that. But I wanted to show you an example of how important the hillfort could be. This site is massive. It has what you can call pretty much an Iron Age city inside it. There'll be space there for 2,000 people, and all the stores and space to like store their food. There'll be spaces in there for livestock as well, and it has all these complex defences all the way around it. And the idea being that if someone gets over one of these ditches, they're not entirely sure where to go to get the gate. They end up running in amongst all these ditches while the defenders are throwing spears and rocks at them to kill them off while they go and get themselves knackered. If it's not being a defensive site primarily, is it working as an administrative centre instead? It seems to be that you could argue in times of stability, hillforts cease to function defensively, which makes sense. You're not always going to have guards sitting watching if there's not an invasion coming. So it appears that hillforts are slightly defended with these big ramparts, these giant walls and ditches that you can see in this picture here of Maiden Castle. They enclose high ground, they're monumental in size. They are a testimony possibly to violence and attacks and invasions happening. But we've got to be careful that symbolic military strength to show, so in other words, showing off that your tribe are the top dogs and they look amazing because they can build a huge hillfort, showing that off doesn't necessarily equate to using it. So therefore, it's kind of like, I guess, if you liken that to the armed forces of the USA in today's world. The USA has the biggest army, navy and air force in the world. Well, maybe not quite the biggest army, but the best equipped, I guess. But they don't use it. Occasionally they have little skirmishy wars, like Afghanistan or Iraq or something, but they never go to full-scale war with anyone. They haven't done so realistically since World War II. But they have this massive symbolic strength to make USA a world power. However, if you're an archaeologist and you're looking back and you found evidence of all these tanks and guns and aircraft carriers, you think the USA is really warlike. Look at all this stuff they got. They must have been fighting all the time. It's not the case. They kind of show off their strength. So it might have been that Iron Age tribes are showing off their strength by the power and the size of the hillfort rather than actually being warlike. So therefore, these places may have had another purpose. Now this one is Traprain Law. This one I was talking about, it was the second tribal centre for the Votadini tribe in Lothian and in the Scottish borders. So some of these largest hillforts, some of them being among the earliest, the really big ones like Eildon Hill and like this one, Traprain Law, may have been basically tribal capitals. By that I don't mean a capital city, I mean it's a centre of power. So it's where the nobles and where the tribal chief or the king would probably be based, and it's where a number of people probably lived on a fairly permanent basis, but it's where people in the wider tribe would know this is where you go if you want to go and speak to someone who's in power, or it might be the place where instructions come from to tell you what to do. So it makes it an administrative centre. And it makes sense. It's a huge thing on the landscape. People know where to go to speak to someone that's in power. You can also look to that for signals. You probably gather there for festivals or for like tribal events. So hillforts very much become a focus for the community. The Traprain Law here on this kind of reconstruction of what it looked like is a fairly big emplacement. It's massive. They reckon they could have stuffed a couple of thousand people in here if they needed to within the walls, though they wouldn't have been able to live there permanently. There's no source of water on the hilltop, so staying there permanently would have been difficult if there was enemy camped outside. As you can see, moving on with this, some hillforts are manifestly not defensive. They are too large to defend. Now this hillfort here, even if you stuffed it with all the people of the tribe, the circuit size of the walls going round about this mean you would need hundreds upon hundreds of warriors to defend that length of wall. And it's unlikely you're going to get all those menfolk congregated in the one place. The population of Northern Britain, nowadays the population of Scotland is 5.2 million roughly. The population of that area of Britain in the Iron Age, you're looking at an absolute maximum of 1 million people. So there's less than 20% of the people in the area that there are now. It may have been as low as 500,000. So it might even just be as low as 10% of those people. So people are spread across the landscape, and getting enough people together to gather to put them in this hill fort to defend it, it's going to be tough going. So it's probably too big to defend properly, and that's another argument against hill forts being defensive as opposed to being administrative centres. So therefore they may have served, because of their size, as a seasonal meeting place. It needs to be big because everyone knows, I don't know, on the longest day of the year, in the summer equinox, we all go and gather at the hill fort, we have a big party and we honour the gods and we trade cattle, that kind of thing. You need it to be big then because loads of people are coming to one place. There could be festivals there or fairs, or it could also be like a kind of hub for dispersed communities. So all the villages spread across the landscape might know to come to the hill fort for trading days, or to days where the priests are going to be in town and there's going to be a set festival for one of their gods. So, exploring the ritual role a bit more, this is our third factor behind what hill forts might have been for, is it might have been something to do with sacrifice and honouring the gods. Now you see here, this is a picture of a funeral pyre in the Iron Age. There's a point in the archaeological record where it seems to be the people in northern Britain stopped building tombs for their dead. That seems to fall round about 1000 AD, which is about the start of the Bronze Age. Now that begs the question, what are they doing when they're dead? Now the lack of bones being found in tombs or buried in the tomb sites or monument sites from this time suggests that bodies are not being buried, they're left out instead, or they're being burned like this. Now we do find human ashes collected in pots called beakers, which are then buried in burial mounds. So we know that some people have been burned. The theory goes, however, that they undertook something called excarnation, which is when they would put the body up on a platform and they would leave it to nature to basically get the meat off the bones, as it were. So natural predators would come, or the skin would rot away and so on. It would probably be left in some kind of sacred site where people didn't tend to go, so that could be the hill fort enclosure. We don't go up there because Uncle Steve's up there, I don't know. And then after they've given it a good while, like 6 months to a year, they go back up. They find the skeleton or the bones that are left, and they may be a wee bit scattered around the site because some animals may kind of like tearing at the body now and again, but they tend to put it on a platform so that it stops foxes and whatnot getting at it. They gather the bones in, and then the bones are put together in a cluster and buried in the side of a burial mound, or put in like a kind of tomb passageway that is kind of subterranean underground. We've got evidence of that kind of thing happening. So we find like clusters of bones, which makes us think that the skeletons have been basically reassembled together once the meat's off and then secreted as a kind of burial for the community. So it might be that hill forts are being used as a site where this kind of thing is happening. So they could be burial sites. Now, Eildon Hill, that one way from the start, had lots of burial sites on it, so that could have been one of the things that was happening there. Now, a fourth reason behind hill forts is they could be statements of prestige. Now, this picture here is based pretty much on real findings we've discovered from Celtic and Iron Age burials in Britain. That shield that the chief on the chariot there has got is the Battersea shield. There is it's called the Modern Art Gallery nowadays down in London, but the Tate Modern occupies a building called the Battersea Power Station, and in the River Thames in front of that, they dug that shield out of the river in front of it. It's made of bronze and it's got precious garnet red stones embossed in the front of it. It is amazing. So we know that they had ceremonial shields like that. It would have been much use in a fight because it would have been too heavy, too kind of fancy as well. You wouldn't want to get that smashed up by someone beating a sword off it. The helmet he's got as well was dredged up just further down the Thames from there as well. In the chariot, we found examples of chariots like these in burials, along with the horses, sadly, from Iron Age tombs. And then archaeology has suggested that Iron Age forts may have had a timber palisade along the top of an earth rampart like this too. So most of what you see in this picture is based on archaeological evidence we've dug out of the ground. Even the charioteer who's in charge of the horses, the chariot, has a gold torque around his neck. We found loads of them in tombs as well. And if you go to the National Museum in Edinburgh, you'll see lots of those on the shelves there. So, prestige. Now, the point I'm talking about with his equipment, the chief, and what he looks like, is he looks different from the other people in that picture because he's showing his wealth. Having metal objects in the Iron Age shows that you have access to lots of resources, lots of skilled craftsmanship, and it shows therefore that you are a wealthy, elite individual. So you're showing off how important you are. That's what that picture is all about. We've got the boss of the Hillfort wearing his best clothes with his best kit on his shiniest chariot, and he is showing off to these poor guys that are showing up with the goats in front of him. So could it be then that Hillforts are actually just a way of people showing off, symbols of prestige? Symbolic defences on forts may suggest the presence of warrior elites, as they're using the fort as a symbol of their power, since the Hillforts give a type of dominance over the landscape. As I said earlier on, Hillforts are above everything else in the landscape, or the lands of the tribe. So if you're the group of people that occupy that fort, you have symbolic power over that land. That's prestige. That's you looking more important. From that, it could be that Hillforts are about that. They've been occupied by the chief and the elite warriors and his warband, and because they live in that site, they are made more important by their Hillfort. So that might explain as well why Hillforts get more and more different kind of ramparts, those walls that go around them. You'll see some Hillforts have got dozens of little individual walls that go all the way around. The more walls you have around your Hillfort, the more impressive it looks. So that builds it into the idea of controlling the landscape, bringing prestige to the people that live inside. An example of that is Chester's Hillfort in Lothian. You can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different ramparts around that Hillfort. So that would have looked super impressive in the valley down below off to the left of that photograph. What makes us think this Hillfort in particular is about prestige is the way they built it. If you're approaching from the valley off to the left, where you can see the land kind of sloping down towards, this Hillfort would have looked amazing. There would have been 7 rows of defences facing you. And you can see there's a kind of track leading into this kind of gateway in the inner enclosure. That gateway would have looked monumental from the valley floor. It looked incredibly big. However, as a defensive site, it is completely, utterly useless. Have we think why? The reason it's useless, if you've read about the top of the slide, is that hill on the right, just to the right of the farmhouse, is actually higher than the centre of the Hillfort. It is overlooked. So if an enemy group approached the Hillfort and they had archers or slingers, they can literally stand off to the right of it and just pelt the inside the Hillfort with arrows and slingshot and pretty much decimate anyone that's inside it. It is indefensible. So it's ineffectual as a defensive fort, which undermines the idea of Hillforts being defensive sites. Why are you going to the effort of building this site here when it's completely useless at protecting the occupants? So there's a wee bit of historiography here by a historian called Ian Armitt. He's going to be one of our main guys for the Iron Age. He thinks this fort here was built to glorify the inhabitants or the elite rather than to defend them, and he says that based on the fact sight of it hints at sheer defensive incompetence. As a wee side note as well, Armitt is one of our main guys for the Iron Age, and his point of view on the whole is the Iron Age was a peaceful time in northern Britain where prestige, looking good, was the most important thing. It's not warfare, it's not sacrifice, it's not trade, it's all about looking good and showing off your own importance within the society that you live in. Now, another example of Hillforts, as I said, there are hundreds of these across Scotland. This one is in Angus. It is just north of Dundee. There are 2 here in this picture. They're called the White and Brown Caterhuns. Now, the one in front of us, the stone one that's kind of oval shaped, is called White Caterhuns, and that's because the rampart wall that you can see, there's several layers of ramparts around the top of this hill. The stone kind of glows white in the sun, so that's why it's called White Caterhuns. That's an actually defensible site. You can see possibly in the right hand side of the oval inside it, there's a kind of black crater. That's a well, so it's got a water source inside the fort. The outer ring enclosure that you can see that goes almost as far as the outlying trees just off to the right there, this outer rampart here gave them a space to put their livestock in. In fact, you can see a kind of squarish footprint off to the kind of like northwestern end of the Hillfort there. We think that might have been used to keep the animals in when people came up here to hide. The stone walls inside the fort here would have been gigantic, absolutely massive. On the other side of the valley, there's actually a kind of road. You can see there's a wee white car actually on the road that separates the 2 hills, winds its way up there. On the other side, on top of that brown summit, hopefully you can see there's some concentric rings that go around the summit of the hill. That's called Brown Caterhuns. That one doesn't have stone walls, and it's very weird. So these 2 are like chalk and cheese. The one nearest us, White Caterhuns, is, yes, absolutely a defensible site because it has massive stone walls. Brown Caterhuns in the distance there does not have stone walls. It's even bigger, so think about how many people you'd need to defend the gigantic size of those walls inside in terms of their circumference, and it also has 9 different entrances. The last thing you want if you're trying to defend a site is have lots of gates, because gates are weak points that people can force their way through. Having 9 different entry points is awful for a defensive site. The white one, White Caterhuns over here, has 2, so it's far less, so it's much more defendable. So we suggest that White and Brown Caterhuns, the fact that Brown Caterhuns has so many entrances, it seems to invite access more than deter it. It looks like something other than defence is going on in the brown one, whereas perhaps the white one is being used as a kind of last retreat. Hillforts are also built to give occupants elite physical dominance of the surrounding landscape. So that's once again buying into the idea of if you're the highest up thing in the landscape and you're in charge of that space, then that makes you the most important person there. Now, what you need to build that Hillfort though also demonstrates your power. Hillforts demand collective manpower to upkeep and to repair, a constant method of asserting and reinforcing your authority. This is before we have like JCBs and diggers and any form of machinery at all, obviously, that's going to help you move land and raise stone walls, cut down trees that you're going to use to build palisades or huts. You need to do this all by hand or all with animal power. So in the first place, to raise your first rampart wall, you can see how significant the gateway looks on this fort here. That's going to take thousands of hours of manpower to cut those stones. And like I said, in Eildon Hill Fort at the start of this PowerPoint, those stones are not on that hilltop, so they had to be bought from the valley down below and dragged up that hill. That would have been a titanic effort. You need to employ hundreds, if not thousands, of people at a time to do that. So what we think may have happened is during perhaps festival times in the summer, where people in the tribe come together and gather to trade or to observe festivals or to swap livestock, it may have been a time ceremonially where the people of the tribe gave their labour to their chief, and they would spend several days, maybe a couple of weeks, working on the hill fort and making it bigger. Now, if you can imagine, over a process of hundreds of years that the tribe lives in that area and controls the landscape, if every single summer hundreds of people are coming to give up the labour to erect new parts of the hill fort or to maintain it, it's gonna get really, really big. Some of the hill forts are enormous because it represents centuries of labour. Now, to organise that labour, people aren't going to willingly just give up all that backbreaking effort. You need someone in charge of them to make that happen. And that shows us, therefore, this is an argument that hill forts are about prestige, because you need someone with prestige, someone with authority who's in charge to make that hill fort happen. So even the process every year of coming back to maintain the hill fort maintains that person's authority. It builds prestige. Okay. So hill forts and their remodelling, therefore, may represent the coming to power of new chiefs or kings keen to legitimise their position. So what we could argue that was, every time a new king gets crowned, the people come together as a big kind of ceremony, and they decide to give their labour and they build a new bit of the fort. So every time the fort gets extended, it might represent a new king taking charge of the tribe. Some hill forts show little evidence of settlement and indicate that they were focused of a ritual or ceremonial activity, chosen possibly due to the topographical setting. So for example, they're in a really significant place in the landscape. Maybe there's no well up there, maybe it's really exposed and windy, so it's the last place you actually want to permanently live. An example of this is Dundee Law, is one of the hills just at the back of the city of Dundee. It had a hill fort on it, excavated by Steve Driscoll. Sites like that make us think that people are coming here for ceremonial reasons. They don't stick around. They build a hill fort around it to look good as part of the ceremony, but it's not about permanently occupying the place. So it's likely, therefore, that hill forts may have housed a small permanent population of priests, craftsmen, or local nobility, but on the whole, not many people who stayed there permanently all year round. Think about the effort of going up and down that hill every time you wanted to go get a bucket of water, or you wanted to gather some food from the valley below. And here we have the main historian for ironies that we're going to use. Look at his cold-blooded eyes. This is Ian Armitt. So he supports the new idea that hill forts reflect fragmented social groups seeking to reinforce authority rather than permanent settlements, and they should be seen as places where people would congregate for special times. So basically what he's telling us is the Iron Age is not warlike. It's not about people building castles all over the landscape. He thinks that hill forts are places where people are coming together to reinforce how their tribe works and who's important. That's his point of view. Okay. The old-fashioned point of view, because I always try and give you historians to contrast against each other, is Stuart Piggott, and you can see by the fact the picture is black and white, this is a clue that this is from some time ago. So in the mid 20th century, when he was working through the kind of 50s through the 70s, Piggott develops the invasionist idea that forts serve to defend the natives from the instability brought during the Roman advance. So he says the native British tribesmen threw hill forts up as a reaction to defend themselves against the threat of the oncoming Roman advance across Britain. As a point of this one, the Romans under Claudius landed in Britain in 43 AD. Just by the sheer nature of the logistics of conquering an island the size of Britain, the Romans came with 40,000 men. It took them 17 years to get to the top of Wales. So it's an idea of just how slowly they were creeping across northern Britain, or up to northern Britain at least. The first recorded contact we have with the Romans, written down, with the northern British tribes north of where Hadrian's Wall would end up being, is 78 AD. So that means it took them 35 years to get from setting foot on Britain to coming into military contact with the tribes in what we call southeastern Scotland. So that gives the tribes plenty of time to build those hill forts every summer and throw up those defences waiting for the Romans to come. And also time for paranoia, I suppose, to develop that they were going to be next. In contrast to the old-fashioned view of Piggott, Armitt and his friend Ralston emphasised that recent work plays down the idea of hill forts as being defensive places, instead stressing their social implications. They command the mobilisation of labour for the tribe. It signals territoriality because it obviously shows they're in control of the landscape they're about it. And it shows the authority implicit on their scale and location. So whoever is in charge of building that is therefore a very important person, and not necessarily an important guy. In our new society, it seems that women had power and had a fair say as well. Very much not like the Romans, who were a sexist bunch. So according to Armitt and Ralston, there is no firm evidence to link warfare with hill fort construction. This painting here is a reconstruction of White Caterhuns that I was talking about a wee bit earlier on. You can see the big tall stone walls with a wee bit of a settlement just off to the left of it there. So, what is our task that comes out of this? Now, each time I do one of these inputs on the Advanced Higher course, it usually leads into a source question, into an essay, because I've given you the factors or the different theories that will back up basically what's going to go into your answer, along with historiography you can use to get those extra marks. Or it will come into a research piece. Now this one is going to result in a research piece. Each of you guys are now going to be tasked with researching one of the following hill forts and then presenting your findings back to the group. To be a success, I would like you guys to produce a PowerPoint with a description of your hill fort outlining any interesting details. So what I want to see is the name of your PowerPoint clearly shared. We want pictures of what it looks like so people can set it in their mind about what you're talking about. So you want to include images to illustrate your findings. You want to include the names of any key archaeologists who excavated the site or who undertook excavation or analysis of your given hill fort. And you want to basically, if there's anything interesting, like if it's there's any dating about when it was destroyed or attacked, put that in. If there's any link to the Roman invasions of northern Britain to your hill fort, please put them in too. If there's any interesting theories about what was going on there, if there were sacrifices or burials, or if there's evidence of buildings inside the hill fort to show permanent occupation, perhaps, put that in as well. Basically give me a kind of rundown about your hill fort, what it looks like, what's going on. Okay. If anyone's got any questions about it, please get in touch.